She gave birth at 60. Then her husband saw the baby and abandoned her. What happened next is heartbreaking. Atifa had her first child when she was 60 years old, but her husband left her after seeing the baby's adorable face. You'll cry after what happens next. Atifa felt like the room was full of crying babies as soon as she heard them. She had forgotten about all the pain and discomfort from the past few months. She felt more than just relief. She felt a rush of deep joy. She had never been happy about anything that way before. When the nurse put her newborn baby wrapped in a baby shawl into her chest, tears ran down her face. The girl was beautiful. The nurses said she was healthy and had good lungs, even though she was very small. Atifa was happy to hear the news. Having her own baby that she gave birth to herself was her dream come true. The nurses asked Atifa what she thought the baby's name should be. She told them with pride, her name is Alina. The nurses gushed over how beautiful the name was and how well it fit the child. Sharif, Atifa's husband, heard the baby's cries right outside the delivery room. He felt different emotions than Atifa. He was scared and felt like he didn't belong. The baby's cries made him want to run away as fast as he could. It had been a long time since he had been around a baby. He forgot how loud they were and how much they cried. He wouldn't have had a child if he could have, especially since he was so old. He wanted to spend the rest of his life quietly and without a lot of noise, but he knew that this baby would make that impossible. What was Atifa thinking when she said she wanted to have a child when she was already so old? The idea of having a baby was terrifying to him. The man was 68 years old. Both he and Atifa were too tired to keep up with a baby who was always going to be moving around. Partly because of this, he had been against having the child. They also didn't want to have a baby because they were poor, and most importantly, Atifa's health would be at risk. What if it was too much for her body? But Atifa wouldn't give up. At that point, he knew he couldn't raise the baby with her. Sharif had no doubts about that at all. He was retired and didn't even receive a pension. He did odd jobs here and there, but they barely covered his basic needs. He couldn't even begin to think that he could take care of a baby that wasn't even his own. It was impossible for him to do. Atifa lost her smile when he told her what he had decided. She stuttered as she tried to think of words to make him change his mind. If he left her now, how would she cope with the baby? He didn't know how to answer her question when she asked. It made Atifa sad. She had tried to have a child for 30 years. The process had been long and arduous. It had been hard on the mind, body, emotions, and finances. For the first few years, her family and friends were all behind her. But when the IVF failed, they told her to forget about it and move on with her life. They thought that her desire to have a child of her own was dangerous and often told Atifa that she could still feel like a mother by adopting a child and becoming a foster mother. But those things were always turned down by Atifa. It didn't feel right to her, and it wasn't in line with her dreams. That's why she kept trying, even when things got hard, coming back to try again and again until she finally got pregnant. It took 5 tries of IVF before she got pregnant. The baby wasn't made with her husband's sperm. Instead, a man who didn't want to be named gave his sperm for the process. Atifa told Sharif that she had gone through everything because he agreed with her choice. Sharif said that wasn't the whole truth. He had always said no to her having a child, but she was so determined that he finally gave in. He wished he had stuck to his first position until the end, but he gave in to her pleas, and look where that got them. He felt bad about it. Sharif was going to give Alina his last name, but now he said he wouldn't. He thought there was no point because he was leaving Atifa and wouldn't be able to be Alina's father. His desire for a clean break from both of them was made easier by the fact that he wasn't Alina's actual father. Sharif's kids from his first marriage were grown up and lived abroad. He got married to Atifa for the second time. They had been married for 10 years. Whatever the reason, he didn't think about that when he started making plans to go to the country where his kids were. He meant to stay there. It would be far away from the cries of Alina and the pleas of Atifa. He felt sorry for Atifa and what she would have to go through on her own. They worked full-time jobs and lived in a small flat. Lots of people might even say the couple were poor. There was something wrong with Sharif's heart. For many years, he took care of his health by avoiding things that made him stressed and living as healthily as he could. But since they had a baby and that needed extra care and attention, the few resources they had would run out. It wouldn't be enough for all three of them. And that wasn't even the worst part. Knowing that the baby's cries would keep him from sleeping well for a long time was the worst part. It would keep him up at night, make him cranky during the day, and make his health worse over time. He had been married to Atifa for 10 years, and they had always been lovely together. They were good friends and had given up a lot for each other. But this one choice Atifa made turned his whole life for the worst and threw off the balance in their relationship. It was way too much to have a baby. In fact, he finished getting ready, got on the plane, and left the country in just a few days. Atifa felt lost and alone in her life after Sharif left. She had no idea what to do next. She worked in a textile plant, but the wages she made were so low that they wouldn't be able to meet basic needs. The fact that she had been in a hospital 3 months before giving birth because of health problems didn't help. Since she was taken to the hospital, she thought Sharif must have been sick of her right away. He had become distant, cold, and uninterested in anything. He had asked all the right questions about her well-being, but he had an angry look in his eyes that made her feel like she was to blame for her current situation. Because the doctors and the other health orderlies had been so careful with Atifa, her health problems hadn't gotten out of hand, but she still had a long way to go to get better. She needed help so badly at that very important time in her life, but she could not count on anyone to help her. An interesting fact about Atifa, she had ties to Rasim Lake, who was Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Trade. He was her first cousin. Rasim was rich and powerful, and he could help her right away, but Atifa knew he wouldn't. It had to do with how her family worked. Atifa and Rasim were related because their dads were brothers, but they had a big fight a long time ago. People around Rasim's father had to bend in a certain way because he was the straight and strict type, but Atifa's dad had been more open-minded. After many years, Rasim and his siblings were richer and had more connections than Atifa and her brothers. Rasim's dad thought this was because of how they were raised. He didn't want his kids to help Atifa or any of her brothers. Rasim's father had felt disgusted when he learned about Atifa and her use of IVF to try and have a child. He was very religious, and he thought that children were a gift from God. If they weren't coming, either beg God to forgive you or see it as a sign you were not good enough. This is how he thought and how he felt, and he had taught Rasim the same. Atifa was determined not to give up, no matter how hard things were for her. There was no doubt in her mind that she could raise her daughter in the right way. There was a way to do anything if you wanted to, even though Atifa had trouble seeing and her flat was very small. There was no doubt in her mind that she could make things better, but she wouldn't give up. Atifa brought her baby back to the small flat after she was released from the hospital, and her home felt very empty without Sharif there. It was also wet and smelled bad. Things were already bad in her home, but they were going to get worse. Atifa put moving into a new flat at the top of her list of things to do. That's what she wanted, but she didn't have the money to do that just yet. She was lucky that she had a lot of baby things because she had spent years collecting them in case she ever found herself pregnant. Her funds let her and Alina stay in that old flat for one more month before they ran out. After a short break, Atifa went back to work at the textile plant to make some money quickly. She began working long shifts with no break. She took Alina home with her at the end of the day and still took care of her over the night. She was putting too much stress on her body though, and one morning she broke down and couldn't get out of bed. She couldn't go to work or take care of her baby Alina for many days because she was stuck in the bed. She wished she could call or talk to someone for help, but she couldn't. As she lay there, she was scared. She thought this wasn't how her story was meant to end. Her dream baby was meant to come into the world and make her happy, but everything was wrong. Alina was fed and bathed by Atifa with what little energy she had left that day. And in spite of that, Alina cried a lot back then. It used to be that Atifa would hold her for hours and hours at a time, rocking her and singing her lullabies. But now Atifa felt too weak to do any of those things, and she felt terrible about it. After a week, social workers came to Atifa's door. People who lived near Atifa had called them because the child would not stop crying. Being in a flat with thin walls made it hard for them to sleep and enjoy their peace. They thought that Atifa shouldn't have kept her baby if she couldn't take care of her. When Atifa saw the social workers, she was shocked. It hurt her that her neighbors had called them. She was friends with a lot of them and thought they would come to her first to figure out what was going on instead of calling the social services. The flat was a mess and it didn't sit well with the social workers. This was not a healthy environment for a baby that was only a few months old. Atifa told the social workers that she had not been feeling well and didn't have any help. Alina was supposed to be taken away by the social workers. They didn't think Atifa was ready to take care of her, but Atifa got down on her knees and begged them not to. If they took her baby away, her life would have no point. The social workers changed their mind when they saw Alina's nursery. It was clean, smelled good. Alina was neat and clean. Yes, her face was a little red from crying, but she was healthy. Once the social workers saw this, they told Atifa that she was on probation for 2 months. In that time, she had to show that she was healthy enough, mentally stable enough, and financially stable enough to take care of her baby. Atifa agreed and thanked them very much. Unfortunately, more bad things were to come. Following a few days, Atifa was fired from her job at the textile plant. Her bosses at the textile plant said they gave her enough time to have the baby and rest, but she still hadn't gotten back to work full time, and her productivity had decreased. They hired someone else to do her job and told her to look for somewhere else to work. Atifa was overcome with sadness. She wasn't ready for such a sudden shock. Besides everything else she was going through, she thought about what to do for days. It looked like there was no way out. Her life was falling apart. Atifa didn't have any food for days, but she made sure Alina didn't go hungry by giving her breast milk several times a day. Atifa went out into the streets to look for work as soon as she felt better. She was turned down by many places because she was too old and had a baby. At a time where Atifa felt the most hopeless, her younger sister, Tiala, called her. They hadn't spoken in a while, and Tiala wanted to see how her big sister was doing. They talked about how things were going, and Tiala was very upset to hear what was happening with Atifa. She asked Atifa to come over to her home to rest. During her time at her sister's house, the neighborhood she lived in held many garage sales where everyone was welcome to sell things. Tiala and Atifa both didn't know what to sell, but Atifa had an idea. One morning making breakfast, she decided that she would make cupcakes. Tiala went with her to the kitchen to help. Then they would sell them. A lot of people loved the cupcakes and shared them at the garage sales. Someone asked Atifa to bake cupcakes for her birthday party. They paid her ahead of time and she agreed. Atifa was able to follow through on that order, even though it was hard. There were a lot more requests that came in. Atifa got some help to keep up with them. She was told by one of them that she should start a shop. Although Atifa thought that was a silly idea, she still said she'd give it a shot. The bakery was a hit as soon as it opened. People in offices, schools, parks, and other places asked Atifa to sell her cupcakes to them every day. Atifa was able to find a new flat for her and her daughter to live with the money she made from her new business, making cupcakes. And she worked in the same city as her sister Tiala, so she wouldn't have to go back to where she used to live. Atifa and Alina spent a lot of time together. Alina was almost 2 years old now, and she was very cute. A lot of people loved her and thought she was a beautiful child. Alina was also very smart. The cute and smart things she did with her mom and how well she behaved showed how close they were. Atifa was really happy. Atifa was finally living her happy life with her child. What happened next, though, broke everyone's heart. Atifa started to feel bad more often than usual. Something was happening to her, but she didn't notice. One day, she was so busy getting things ready for the day, she forgot to eat. Then she passed out and had to be rushed to the hospital. When she got to the hospital, the doctors found that her blood sugar had dropped so low that it was dangerous. This is what caused her to pass out. Later, doctors discovered she had diabetes type 2. After giving birth to her daughter, Atifa's body had changed. She had gotten so busy with earning a living and for her daughter's sake that she had failed to take care of herself. She was overweight and at risk for suffering a stroke. Determined to give her daughter the best life, Atifa booked a consultation with a gym trainer and nutritionist. They cost a frightening amount, but Atifa knew that she needed them to live a long life and to see her daughter grow up. She dedicated a good chunk of her time to workouts tailored to her needs and to healthy dieting. It was very difficult, but she succeeded at it because she had a strong accountability system and great motivation. Atifa often took Alina over to Tiala's house. She wanted her sister and her daughter to be close, so that in case anything happened to her, Alina wouldn't be all alone in the world. She desperately hoped that this would not be the case, and in fact, she had been feeling so good since she started consciously taking care of her health and was optimistic that she would live until she was 90. Whichever way, it didn't matter all that much to Atifa. The most important thing to her was that appreciating the gift that every day brought and living it to its fullest.